internationally known wet site archaeologist, a faculty member at South Puget Sound Community College. And he's really done wonderful work in partnerships with the tribes at wet sites, at Ozette, at Hoco River, at Quoquas, Sunken Village, and he's currently working on a 500 ancient fish trap stakes from the Hoqueen River. He's participated in these partnerships with the tribes of the Makah, Squaxin, Brown Brown, Salez, Haida, Quinault, Chehalis, and Nisqually, and also internationally with Japanese archaeologists who have sponsored some of his wet site work in the Northwest. He is a founding member of the Squaxin Island Museum, Library, and Research Center, and that celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2012. He also was very active in the wonderful Paddle to Squaxin canoe journey last summer, and the State Historical Society recognized Dale last year with the Peace and Friendship Award. His presentation today is on Quilpigüe, a 10,700-year-old northwest coast wet site on the small island of Ellen Island off the west coast of British Columbia. So welcome.
Thank you, Shanna. Should point out we're working together on the George Bush history and homestead, the original homesteader that came into our area. I think we found a great grandniece or something who has a lot of history, and including the family violin and some other things. So look forward to working with her on that. Yeah, I'm a Northwest archaeologist, and this is going to be in part kind of the journey I took in getting to where I am in this field as a specialist in wet sites. So you're going to take a time trip here, time journey. I started at the UW and had some pretty good instructors there. Erna Gunther, who worked with Dick Doherty, I think she was on your committee too at the University of Washington, who opened the doors to me about Northwest Coast cultures and the past. Worked with Bill Holm, took his first series of classes on Northwest Coast Indian art at the UW, and also people like Viola Garfield, who's well known for her work with the Tsimshian, Alex Krieger, an archaeologist that I got to work with quite a bit. I was really enamored by the wealth of the cultures and also the dynamics of the hunting, fishing, and gathering people on our coast, and learning something about that aspect, because all of us came out of that at one point, you know, not too far in the past. We made a living by extracting food from our environment, but they do it very well, and they've created, you know, monumental architecture you'll see here, you know, monumental art, wood carvings. Also, then I did my field work. I finally did my field work with the UW on Lopez Island in 1968, and we dug our sites. And the first thing that struck me is, where is the stuff? You know, 90% of this rich culture I just did not see in these shell midden sites when I was there. So it struck me that it's really too bad that 90+% is gone. You know, so I'm going to kind of go through some of the historical contingencies I went through that influenced me to get involved with wet sites, and particularly with basketry, and set up what I call my bucket list. My bucket list here is the sites after I got involved long enough, the ones I wanted to work on, and certainly Quilpigüe was on my bucket list, so for a decade, and I was so thrilled. And bucket lists are the things you want to do before you kick the bucket. And the nice thing is, if you haven't, you can keep adding things to your list as time goes on. And find the joy happened actually at the UW. I saw this slide at a presentation given by Roald Fryxell. He came over with the WSU Quaternary program as a geologist to talk about Marm's Rock Shelter, a major find in eastern Washington that Richard Doherty, who's here, directed. And actually, it was Richard Doherty's vision that created this quaternary program. And he gave this talk on Marms at the UW in a quaternary program, and he said, oh, we were down on the Hoco River, and we found a few things I want to talk about and show you. And he shows this very slide. This is the slide I saw that really, you know, was part of catching my interest. All of a sudden I saw, wow, not only is this stuff really here somewhere, but basketries are a really complex artifact. It can be very sensitive and tell us a lot about past cultures. So this slide was, I think, taken maybe by Ruth or Louis Kirk when you were visiting in 1968 was this talk right after my field school in the fall. Do you remember if you took this picture? I think it's Pete Rice's hand. He told me. I think Pete Rice gave it to me, but he couldn't have taken the picture if it was his hand with a cut in the finger. But anyway, the more I got into it, I realized basketry is really sensitive. And we got museum people here, and these are baskets from around the Northwest coast. So we're going to do a little quiz here, particularly of Susan here, and maybe Drew. These are baskets that are in your collections, no doubt. Can you tell me anything about where this might have come from? Or maybe Shanna, or any of you? Yes?
Pat Courtney Gold made that based on a very old piece that was found out of the Peabody collection at Harvard, based on a piece that Lewis and Clark carried back with them.
Yeah, so it's the very same design that was on the basket, Lewis and Clark. So which tribe?
Well, she's Warm Springs, it's Columbia River.
Yeah, she's Warm Springs, Washoe. So Columbia River, see? And it's very different in terms of how you might look at this basket. Come on, Drew, where do you, I mean, they have a great basket collection. Macaw, yeah, this is Macaw. Very different than this. It has different designs on it, made of different materials. This one would have been made originally out of root, probably. Anybody know where this comes from? Yeah, Tlingit. Yeah, Drew's doing pretty good. How about this one with the little dogs going to look, the little lucky dogs going along? What? I don't hear very well. Yeah, you're getting all the answers. Let somebody else. Okay, but the Skoke and the weaver here is a master weaver, Ed Carrier, who I work with a lot. Any idea what his clam baskets are, where they're from? Yeah, so they're Coast Salish clam baskets, and he's become quite the expert at this, and baskets are very important to Northwest Coast people. It's part of who you are. It's your identity. These baskets will tell you something about where you're from. And Ed's done something very interesting, and I don't think I have time to show it, but he did his own 15-minute video to teach his grandkids how he makes this cedar limb, split cedar limb baskets, how you get the materials, how you prepare them, how you do the elaborate rim on them. So he wants to, through cultural transmission, make sure this continues as it has for 10,000 plus years. And also, it's very important if you've ever been to a Northwest Native American Basket Weavers Association that's only been going for 14, 15 years, started here at Evergreen. 1,000 people come to those. This is down at Squawks, Siletz, and here's a couple years ago at Suquamish. It was at Emerald Queens last year, and 1,500 weavers came, native weavers. So that tells you the power of basketry. It tells you how important this is to them and to transmit this into the future generations. 500 of those individuals that came were students they transported by bus to learn to weave with these master weavers. So back in '68, this is where I was with another archaeologist that's gone a different direction than I did, Dr. Randall Schalk, more went into theory. But this is the time period, and I like to show students this just to show you how what I went through and how I got involved in this kind of work. Again, these pictures from HOCO that I saw that Rold presented shows Harvey Rice here and working at the HOCO. And again, this is the one that got my interest. I mean, you never know how these things are going to happen in your life. You know, it's historic contingencies. But other slides he showed how they used water to excavate it. And you probably took some of these, Ruth or Louie, because you were there, I'm pretty sure, right? Or part of it you were there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And here's Roald and Jerry Grosso, who's doing the excavation, two people that influenced me a lot. Looking at the bank, wondering how this came to be. Roald thought this was 6,000 years old. Came out to be more like 3,000 years old, time of King Tut. So that basket was woven 3,000 years ago. And Dick Doherty, you need these kind of visionaries to guide you, but he certainly saw the value of these kind of sites. But not only the Quaternion program, but another major vision was how you work in partnerships with tribes. This award she mentions with the Peace and Friendship was partly because I did that, but when I went to Ozette, that's the way I thought you did it. You know, you had partnerships 50-50 with tribes, and they were pretty courageous back then too. You might have taken this too, Ruth. But they evidently got back because he's with us today, and but they also had to work on Ozette with the Makahs, and there's personalities on that side that made that happen. In this case, I'd have to give an awful lot of credit to Ed Kaplanaho, who was given the chore of deciding if they would let WSU work at Ozette. And he happened to be a acquaintance of Dick Doherty's because he went to WSU, and the council base said, "You're a Cougar, it's your call. You know, do you want to do this?" But he knew this was real important to do this. So Ed was chair when we went to the wet site part of Ozette. At that point, you know, he certainly made sure it happened. John Itis is here. He was chair at the time. We're working at HOCO here's Jerry, but we're working on a net we found in 1977. And nets get real exciting when you find those for tribes, because one of the main arguments in the Bolt case was that Indians learned to make nets from non-Indians. And this 3,000-year-old net, we're about to recover a gill net. That's me, but still using just for men, I think. But we'll take you on a time trip from 300, 500 on down to 10,700 years ago to show you some of the things we've seen and been involved with. This map kind of shows you the style of baskets, how through this 3,000, 4,000 years, we see style continuity and probably cultural transmission in, say, the inside coast, Salish Sea. That's different from the outside where we're digging at 3,000-year-old Ozette, HOCO and 300-year-old Ozette site. So we'll take a time trip here. And the statistics we use to test those styles and come up with these, this map that shows different styles for 3,000 years, it actually looks at all the weave techniques and all the baskets that we find from these ancient sites. And you can see you do have sort of an inside Salish Sea area clustering in this cladistic analysis. But you have on the polar opposite from this 3,000-year-old site here, you have what are on the outside, West Coast styles for 3,000 years. So I knew it was pretty important for, it's like ceramics in the Southwest, for telling us something about the different regions, and they tend to use basketry into the now, you know, for identity, who's their family, what weaves, what designs they use. So it's something that's plastic enough for that. So if you look at these two styles of 3,000-year-old baskets, one from HOCO and one from the Fraser River, Musqueam, and we had a lot of baskets from there, these packed baskets. You could see that, you could tell that these were different styles of packed baskets. Maybe in terms of embolic, you could say the person carrying this basket might be from the inside, from the Salishan areas 3,000 years ago, and somebody with this basket, or a basket full of things, came from someone who got it on the West Coast. And it's kind of like if you drive a Ford or a Chevy, right? It tells something about the people that are sticking with these styles. And it's not telling which culture you came from, but it's that kind of thing that basketry seems to be. It's kind of guarded. And if you look at the sites, the main sites we have, and put them into the time frames like 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, and 500 years ago, and you run that, show that statistics there in these different regions, they go all over the board. They don't come together at all in terms of what are known from the stone, bone, and shell artifacts that define phases. Now, if you look at it, where these sites are located geographically, and see how the statistics groups these sites, it's much better. You have a northern, you have the 3,000 years of outer coast, and then this Puget Sound, Gulf of Georgia area. So it tells you people have probably been in place for some time, at least since the time of King Tut in our area. So we're going to go back here, and if you look at this again, in this case spatially with the same statistics, you can see again they go together spatially really pretty well. So that's as much science as we need to go through, but we'll go through time now and show you what we found on the coast. It's an area that's very wet, as you know today, and very steep topography, so we get a lot of water coming through the ground. These sites are called aquifer wet sites because water loses its oxygen when it comes through the ground and it pumps along underground, and wood and fiber can't be decayed by decay organisms because they can't operate. They need oxygen. Bacteria, fungus needs oxygen like any organism to a certain degree. So it'd be different. You certainly have steep topography in South America, Pacific coast, but there's no water. It's the driest place in the world. Anyway, we'll look at my bucket list, and there's 3 main sites in my later years that I really wanted to look at part of. You might say, well, Ozette, you worked at Ozette. Well, I did, but there's part of Ozette that wasn't explored very much. That's very exciting. And I don't know if I'll get to that, but I did get to these 2 that I really wanted to do. Sunken Village down in Portland, a 1,000-year-old wet site, and Kilgigway. I really wanted to go for a decade, and they called me up last year and said, gee, we want to do a serious invitation. We want you to come help at the lowest tide of the year for that 2 weeks to see what we can find at that 10,700-year-old site. And I had to go through a lot of hoops, but I got there, so I'm going to talk about that too. Ozette, you know, it's known because it's a Pompeii. The whole site was covered by a mudslide. The macaws replicated. You walk into this house in the museum there. They replicated the same dimensions and materials used to make the houses we excavated. Monumental work, certainly up to a mile-long village along here. Hundreds of canoes, no doubt, bringing in whales. We see whalebone all around the house. Very productive whale hunting. And we'll start there because it's around 17 AD. And you remember there was a major earthquake, some of you may know, back in 1700, a 9-point on the Richter scale right off our coast. So it could have triggered this slide, or anyway, it's that time period. You see the house boards and how we're using water. And the artifacts were amazing. This is probably the most elaborate discrete artifact ever found on the northwest coast. A whale saddle carved out of cedar with 700 otter teeth inlaid in it, with a design of a thunderbird holding a double-headed serpent here. And it was painted, and these teeth were embedded very beautifully. And it's found broken up, but Jerry Grosso and others put it together. This just sort of shows some whale bones. There was skull after skull all around the house, and all kinds of loom industry. 3 looms per house, 7 spinners per house, average in the 3 houses we worked on. Huge industry in the hair dog, using hair dog wool, paddles, clubs, seal clubs, just an amazing site. And of course baskets, 500 baskets I analyzed for my dissertation. This is a common one. It's just like at a Hoko I showed you. It's a pack basket, kind of pyramid shape. they're certainly used in the contact period by the macaws when they're bringing in halibut, macaw women working on cleaning halibut. Historic one that I took pictures of from a family in Nia Bay. And you see the transitions, talking about bucket lists. It's certainly metal buckets were starting to take their place. Much easier to come by in a certain degree. And now we use plastic buckets, right, for the same thing on the beach. So you see that transition going on. These are baskets, though, that you see, I don't know, how much are they worth now? I don't want to put prices on them, but they sell them for hundreds of dollars anyway. But so they're very popular. Now, what I really thought was neat about Ozette that we never got to get to very much was it was another house buried 800 years ago lower in the bank. So we excavated all these houses, but Richard Doherty and the crew and Paul Gleason, we dug a 2 by 2 meter square down, and we found all kinds of baskets and wooden wedges and planks in a house that was 800 years old. So on my bucket list, I'd really like to see that done, but I don't think we'll ever get it. It'd be a huge project, you know, just as bigger than what Dick did. Macaws would run it, but there's an interesting site down there. When we were digging, we were finding lots of baskets. When we first get started, this is myself, and they made me get geared up like this because we were pumping from the ocean and they didn't want the jellyfish to sting my eyes, or lose my eyesight or something. So, but this was the layer of the house on the front of the bank, and down here is that we saw signs of that house even back when we began. We knew there was an 800-year-old house down there. This is the most common basket at the Ozette house. Over 50 found in house one. It's a food storage basket made out of split cedar boughs usually, maybe vine maple. But it was the most common. So I went around the country looking at Smithsonian and all over, looking at collections, and found about 3 of these. They just weren't collected in the museums. It was utilitarian. The elders in Macaw say these are, you use them as suitcases to carry things in your, when you're canoeing some to the next camp, and you tie ropes across here. So they just weren't collected by the museums, though it's the most common one there. I'm just saying this because you got to watch museums, right, Susan? So, so anyway, this was one of them, and I took a picture of it way back there in '76, but it hadn't changed much. And then I was up at Hurricane Ridge in the '80s, and the ranger there, they were selling these baskets in general, and all those packed baskets at that point were about 200 bucks, you know. And then there was this one. I said, holy cow, there's one of those food storage baskets, and $20. And it said it was an old clothing basket made of maple, probably vine maple. And we found some of vine maple at Ozette. And it's from Quinault. It's Tahola. And 20 bucks, wow, I mean, I'd pay hundreds for that. So I asked the ranger, I said, tell me about this basket. And he said, well, we don't even know if it's Indian. You know, it could be something like Chinese or something. And I said, wow, you take 15. And he said, sure, I'll take 15. Okay. My prize basket, you know, I really... So it just shows you how sometimes things are biased as to what was collected and what was important in a general sense. About the second basket we found is this hat. So I get real excited about that. It tells you something certainly about the livelihoods, the stratified society they had with nobles wearing these kind of hats and commoners and slaves too. But it was a very complex culture. Commoners wore this kind of hat we found. Even in your life history, what you know, baskets held you when you were born, and you were put into, you know, you wore certain clothing, and you'd be wrapped in cedar mats when you went home. So whalers had special bags. You know, there's 50 different types of baskets in this house. They're very diverse. And we found this is from the Smithsonian, but just full of harpoons in their sheaths and harpooning gear for whale hunting stored in the house. Well, when I was doing this work, the one thing that that the Macaws, we were equal partners, insisted is that I took basketry from the elders. How could I analyze the Yozette baskets without learning basketry? And I didn't think I needed to do that. I can understand a weave or look at the materials, but we were equal partners, and whenever something was requested, we would do it. And I was dead wrong. I learned more here than I probably did in most graduate classes as far as cultural knowledge and gossip. And this is Kibby Lawrence, Vivian Lawrence, who became a very good friend of mine. And I was mentioning to Shanna, she was the, I think, first and only chair of the Makah tribe. And I should point out, her son is vice chair right now, Michael Lawrence. And her other son, Joey, owns the Big Salmon. But these were the weavers that I was taught by. Their master weavers, Isabel Idas, teaching her granddaughter Janet to weave, and her sister, Isabel's sister, Lena McGee Kaplanaho. And so I started working with them, and principal calls me into his office. I said, oh. Yeah, and he says, this is David Whitener. If you know, David Whitener was a major leader with the Squaxin Island tribe. Just went home himself here a few months ago. But he was principal out there when I was taking these classes. So I got to know, and when I was going in to see him, the lady said, he's Indian too. You got a principal now that's Indian. And I said, well, where is he from? And they said, well, Squaxin. And I said, where is that? Because you're out on the West Coast. Squaxin didn't let themselves get known very well until pretty recently. And now they're pretty well. They certainly showed who they were at the Battle of Squaxin here recently in Olympia. 15,000 people from Olympia went to the bleachers and watched them come in. And that's almost 20% of our population in this town, right? It's about, and Shanna mentioned later, she said that was probably the biggest event ever in Olympia. You know, maybe comparable to the centennial celebration of '89, but it was huge, you know, so we all know who they are. Anyway, the David Whitener said, okay, you're going to make sure that they get their coffee and muffin or pastry every morning from the cafeteria, and anything they want, you're going to take care of it. And I was just learning from him. He was teaching me how you treat elders. The other thing that was made clear to me is I could never teach how to do Makah basketry or sell it. And that shows guarding. You know, they're willing to teach me, but I'm not, you know, I might carry that knowledge and know how to do it, but I can't teach you. But they know where I'm at if they needed something that Isabel taught me, you know. And here's Ed again. Ed learned from Isabel. This is at her 100th birthday party. And Ed presented her with a pack basket that she taught him to make, you know, how to do the materials and everything. So Ed wanted to be sure and honor her for doing that. Let's go to 700,000 years ago. Mud Bay right down the road here in Ralph Monroe and Karen Monroe's properties. And that turned out to be a wet site. First thing we find is a gill net. Turns out not to be cedar bark like we thought, but big leaf maple bark. They're really using a different material here to make these gill nets. But again, that's the first artifact we found from the wet portion, so the Squaxins got very excited about this. They were in the process of building a museum, they knew, and this is all available down at the Squaxin Museum. More baskets, we used water, and we could see they're very much like Fishtown down by La Conner in style, which again showed relationship. The edging on this that, again, Ed knows how to do and teaches in that video is what we found on our Squaxin clam baskets, as well as Fishtown. They found it on their and Conway on their cradles. They're very different cradles than Ozette. Here we are with a lot of the Squaxin recovering a gigantic clam basket. On the back of it, we found another one stuck to it. And every Squaxin came out. You can see the design on this, right? You all can tell it's a basket. But every Squaxin said, you know, that tells you whose family that belongs to. And what inlet that family's from of the 7 inlets that are Squaxin. And if we weren't a 50-50 partnership, you know, and they could tell you, well, that meant Toad Inlet. You know, they had 1 here and then they went to 4. That kind of stuff was, they knew it. And we wouldn't have known that. We know it's decorated, but not the cultural knowledge. Here's Rhonda with Ed. Ed would come down anytime we found a basket because he couldn't believe how fresh they were at 700 years old. And he would show our students how he carries his pack basket. And these are another maple bark artifact are these tumplines from Squaxin. So let's go to my first bucket list, Sunken Village. It was mentioned the Japanese sponsored this, so we have the Japanese crew. They consider us a Pacific neighborhood. They don't see this as Northwest Coast. We belong to this Pacific neighborhood that they are very interested in knowing about. And at this site, we worked with Silettes like Robert Kenta and Grand Ron like Clay. And each of these blue flags is a acorn leaching pit that's lined with hemlock, filled with acorns, and they just were taking advantage of how the water pumped through this beach to leach out the acids out of the acorns to make them sweet for consumption. And the 100 of these pits we found lined with hemlock would have carried 2.5 million acorns. This would be a big operation, somebody's wealth that would be well represented here in processing acorns. They make a mush to put in, and again you can see these are the acorn pits. The yellow are stone and bone artifacts, but the red, it represents where they put a stake, so you would, if it was silted over, and they would have been over the winter, you could find the pit because the stake's always on the north side of the pit. Baskets were certainly there, and Bud Lane, who's vice chair of the Silettes, said the discovery of this basket was not just a great find. When I saw the work that came from one of my people from hundreds of years ago, it was almost like meeting someone. It's very hard to put into words. And so if you're from these communities, you know these styles, you know these are your baskets, it's your identity, so it's a very different thing. It's your great-grandparent or your 50th grandmother that made this. And it's in the acorn pit. They call them acorn baskets. And Bud is also a president of the Northwest Native American Basket Weavers Association. And Pat Courtney Gold, Washco, came down to analyze it for us because she makes these baskets. You saw the one that Susan pointed out, but she brought her cedar root pieces and showed us how it was made, and she makes them now. She makes them now. Here's an early Curtis picture showing that Chinook woman on the beach down at the mouth of the Columbia with that, basket style. 2,000 years ago, time of Christ, worked up in Prince Rupert. And this site had not only baskets, but wood carvings that show something of the form lines. And that's me back when this was the time period when we first walked on the moon and Woodstock. So what year would that be? Did I already say that? I probably did. No. Who said that? Oh, that's because Spencer was there at Woodstock. He doesn't remember anything about it, but he was there. Now, so, but their baskets were very Simpson-like in terms of museums. I went through all the UW Burke and the National Museum of Civilization's baskets and replicated it here for them too, but it's a style that's very Simpson for 2,000 years. And that's very different than Tlingit and Haida baskets. This is, in our area, this is Beater Boast down by Duval, Seattle. But they had very unique clam basket or pack baskets with the handles down on the sides. And this is all at the Burke Museum. It was the first site, actually, wet site dug by the Washington Archaeological Society in the 50s. Go to 3,000 years ago, time of King Tut, we talked about Hoko. Again, they were showing decoration on theirs. And harpoon lines from Musqueam. Here's Vince excavating, Vince Cook, who's a Makah member, excavating what would have been, and it had to be related to him, his 150th grandmother's basket. You just have, if you go back that many generations, there's a relationship if you're out there on the West Coast. So he's digging his 150th grandmother's shredded cedar bark cape and pack basket. Would that make a difference to you? I mean, we're scientists, so we look at it, you know, as far as, ooh, this is neat as an artifact, but if you're a tribal member, this has a whole different meaning, but they respect what we're doing and vice versa. Here's one of the baskets I was excavating that shows 3,000-year-old frustration. See the burning here where they had to discard this beauty? So probably somebody was pretty unhappy about that, but we were glad to see it. Here's Isabel with a 3,000-year-old basket. She can tell us how it was made. She can make it for us. She knows the material. She knows it's a berry basket. You know, so we get all kinds of cultural knowledge after 150 generations of grandmother to daughter to granddaughter transmission. Decorated baskets. We even get knob hats, which tell us something about 3,000 years ago. The wearers must have had a certain status. Who knows if they were royal in the same sense as Maquina, but in the Ozette style, but they definitely had knobs on top of their hat. So again, something about the people even back at that time period. And then we found a net. This is a 3,000-year-old Musqueam net from the Fraser River, but ours was monofilament. It's just strips of spruce that are tied with square knots and tied onto an anchor stone. And this is the first time CQ ever got in the London Times, I'm sure, right? CQ Washington, an old Indian fishing net made with split tree roots, was been found here by archaeologists. They believe it is 2,500 years old. It almost looks like it was typed manually in London in the London Times. But, okay, and pack baskets, again, are common at the Musqueam site, but very different, a really different weave and base construction and how you build it. Now, this one could be on my bucket list. I'd sure like to see it done. It's a 4,500-year-old site on the Fraser called Glenrose Cannery site. And so not much is known about it, but boy, the styles are really neat. There's kind of a combination of the West Coast and the interior styles. Whether they're speaking a language that's connected more between the outside and the inside, it's hard to say. 5,000 years old, we're getting there. Here's a net from Baranof Island, Alaska. Again, monofilament, you know, with strips of, I don't know what the material is, but it's square knot. So they've had nets a long time on the Northwest Coast. 6,000 years ago, Silver Hole wet site, Forest Service, found this basket, and here's what it looks like when it's all cleaned and how they've reconstructed it. But if you know Tlingit Haida baskets like Drew, you know, we're not talking about, it's cylindrical, it's twined, and it's spruce root, you know, so you look at these things and you see after 6,000 years, you know, somewhat of a, it's one basket, but it certainly implies that we're seeing similar styles for a long time, because those Simpson baskets were very different. Let's go to the one we're talking about, Kilgigway. And I almost probably shouldn't have gone the way the circumstances were, because they wanted me to come at the lowest tide of the week for 2 weeks, which was the last 2 weeks of the quarter. I mean, I got back on the last day of instruction, and SPSCC, I was thinking, yeah, they're going to let me do that. And I dislocated my shoulder, but my doctor said I could go, but I didn't pick up heavy buckets. And I'm sure there was some other things that'll cost, but eventually SPS gave me a grant to go. So I really appreciated that. But it's 10,700 years old, C14 dating, and we were hoping to find baskets. We found basket materials, but they have found this braid thread. It's really small, and I brought you a replica of that to pass around. But it's a thread, I'm almost sure. And that's spruce root from Hoko. But you can see the strength. And I'm under the impression that at this site, 10,700 years ago, they're using that thread to sew leather. They're making leather clothing. You have boats that were hide covered. They didn't have cedar up there, and they were small spruce probably. They weren't digging out canoes, so they think they were leather hide covered boats. So I'm a little late on this, Ruth and Dick, but I have a Christmas gift for you. That's an ornament. And I made, each one of these takes 2 feet of that spruce root, but I sewed this leather ornament here for you. And so I'm going to pass it on, so you got to make sure they get it. But to show you how my idea works, but here's a little note on that. Sorry it wasn't earlier. I'm still making them, is the problem. You probably took your tree down. But anyway, buckets. Okay, this is, again, definitely on my bucket list. This is the matrix we were excavating. It's a blue color because the soils in a wet site haven't gotten there, enough oxygen to rust the iron to make it brown that you typically see. So you know you're in a wet site if you have blue soils like this. And we had other things we were collecting at the lowest tide of the year. But this shows you where we're at. This is the continental shelf. A lot of this would have been exposed. Probably this was connected right after or during glaciation because so much of the water of the ocean was held up in the glaciers. Here's Kogigwe in the south here. Now this is on my bucket list. We just found a wet site up there, one of my former students with Jim Dixon, that dates. That's a shell midden, and it's above high tide, and we hope to go back there with the Japanese sponsors we had at Sunken Village. It came back with a date. He was at Paddle to Squaxin when he got his date through email after he looked at this wet site, 10,300. So that's the middle of the midden, And so we're going to be working up there, no doubt, with Tlingit Haida. But we were working here in the south end. A little bit about how I got there, and this is their Haida Center for their Parks Canada that invited me. Another reason I almost didn't get to go is because they required 5 weeks out. They asked me for FBI clearance. They wanted security clearance, so I had to run down to the State Patrol, do my fingerprints, and send it into the FBI. And it says it takes up to 8 weeks. Well, where is it? And I finally said, well. Got up there and I called the FBI, and the FBI said, 8 weeks is 8 weeks. And I said, up to 8 weeks, come on. No, we don't help anybody. No, they weren't. I go, oh, she was kind of mean. But so they asked me 4 questions. The head of the Parks Canada up there, he said, where do you work? How long have you worked there? Have you ever been in trouble with the law? And something else. And I said, well, I got a traffic ticket going through Forks the other day. And he said, well, Forks? Oh, if you've been through Forks, we'll let you go. So now they said, do you have any big fangs? And now they let me, that's all they needed, and we went. But this is Parks Canada's museum, and I brought a flyer on that, the Haida Heritage Center up at Skidegate. And it's really different up there how they operate because for Parks Canada, half the management and half the employees are Haida Indian. And so they already, when we worked with them, it was already 50-50 partnership, equal partnership set. You're working with a Haida in an equal partnership. It's kind of like our Mount Rainier saying, hey, why don't you guys consider allowing half your management and half your employees to be, local tribes here. Well, it's beyond or even perception in this, in that sense, but certainly was up there. The leader of the program is Daryl Fedge, one of the best archaeologists I've ever worked with, and he's bringing the director of the Haida Museum with one of the Haida archaeologists, Gwalaga Hart, who you've met, and they have 2 bear skulls. One is like a 13,000-year-old brown bear from that area, not with archaeological remains. The other was a brown bear, about 11,000 years old. But if bears can survive up there, you and I can. I mean, we're the same as far as bears in terms of being omnivores and big-bodied. And so we know bears were up there during the height of the end of glaciation. We were supposed to fly down to the site from Skidegate in a float plane, but they didn't have any. So they got this big, nice flat-bottom boat and a big front end for all our gear. And we took off from Skidegate up here, and we headed down, way up here actually, and headed down and came into here. Tried to stay on the inside, but we had to go, 60 miles, and we had to go on the outside here to this little island here. So wow, that was quite a trip. I was glad we went by boat. And there's a really neat narrow spot here, and you've probably been through it, Ruth and Dick. I don't know the name of it now. But it's a really narrow area, and you got to hit it at just the right tides, and it's just gorgeous so you can actually get through here, otherwise you can't. We get there, this is the watchman's cabins that the Haida use when they work for Parks Canada, and it's a really nice facility. You can see our boat coming in and our crew getting set up. And we're pretty tired by then, and you can tell mine because these are elk socks I got in Forks. In fact, they were so thrilled that I'd been through Forks a lot going to Neah Bay that they called me Forks. They don't know me as Dale. I'm Forks. And the island that we were living right over here, the site's in this little inlet right here. We a few times had a hurricane force wind, so we couldn't take the boat. We had to go through the forest, which was gorgeous. And a daylight picture. This is where the site is inside here, and we were over here and hiked across occasionally. Aerial view of it. At the time they were there 10,700 years ago, this is a freshwater pond. You can tell by the diatoms, these little organisms that they find in the cores. And you can see where we're digging over here on one side of the pond, and you can see where we're digging over here. And there's quite a bit of water flowing through the ground. It's the same thing as any of these wet sites. Water's pumping through the ground. How they see the pond is in this area, and again, at high tide, it's all covered up, so we had to work. It was the lowest tide of the year. You can see where the shoreline was, and that's not calibrated, but 10,000 years ago. But we dug squares here and over here, and that showed us that it was fresh water back then, and marine water after 9,000 years ago. The sea level went way up as the glaciers all melted, and then the area now, the sea levels are going down. This is our line here, and so right in here is when they were working and living there, and then it went high, and now it's back down where you can get to it at the lowest tide, but it's hard. Here's the first day of work. I'm wearing the squawks and knit hat here, you can tell, but here's Daryl and everybody working on getting set up with our screens. We're using water again to screen to see things. All kinds of unifaces, flakes that were taken off one side of this black argillite. They call it argillite. It's an argillite stone. And Haidas are pretty famous for that, for their argillite carvings. Charles Edenshaw. This argillite's a little softer than what we have, but it's classified as, these are argillite pieces. And you get bone artifacts preserved, which is not usual in sites that old. And mussels are all over the beach now, but even that preserves really well. Here's the 10,000-year-old layer, but look at all these mussel shells, well preserved. The fauna, the little snails, along with all this lithic. So it's amazing preservation just because it's waterlogged. Bone artifacts. Wedges, lots of woodworking going on. This is wooden wedges like we see at Ozette, that we see at Hoko, we see anywhere along the coast. They're carefully made with Sitka spruce or I think it's hemlock, right? Was another one was identified, but they're all set up to hold a collar. It might be a leather collar to keep it from splitting. And they're well known right up until today for digging out canoes. It shows you the success of some of this woodworking. 10,700 years of this kind of woodworking. I doubt they're, you know, digging out canoes. Like I said, they didn't seem to have the big cedars or even spruce to make canoes back at that time period. Around the pond, we always found these stakes that somebody drove in 10,700 years ago. They're racks of some sort. And so I'm thinking that these racks are being used to process hides. Here's Gualaga holding up one of the stakes, but and some others. Whoop. So anyway, some of these are what they get these dates from. What were they doing there? The big thing was black bear. They were hunting bear. Everything, you know, we find a big concentration of all kinds of black bear bones. They're also deep sea fishing. All of these are offshore pretty much. Halibut, sculpins, you know, even salmon, but greenling. Birds, even albatross, big winged albatross. Here's some albatross bones. Different place back then, but certainly some of the same things that we're seeing later, particularly in woodworking. Here's a first day we find bone of the bear teeth, black bear teeth. And then we start finding this in that pond in the peat. And this was pretty exciting to me. We're finding hair. You know, here's a hair. See that hair? You see a hair here. And I'm of the opinion, yet to be, you know, they will, there at the University of Victoria, they'll determine the DNA, what kind of hair it is, but I think it's black bear hair because I think they're using this pond to soak these bear hides. They're getting bear all over the place, it seems. Soak the bear hides for a few days and then scrape them down on these racks, and a lot of hair gets left in the pond because hair doesn't usually preserve in wet sites. And then they're using those hides, and that thread is to sew those hides into clothing or into hide-covered boats, like the ornament that we're passing around. Did it get back to Dick and Ruth? I don't know. We also found for the first time whale bones, a big vertebra from a whale. And we also found, you know, fishing was good. This is Dr. Mackey, Quentin Mackey. He was really the fisherman. But I think one of the most exciting artifacts, in a sense, is this bone bipoint that probably was a barb on the deep sea fishing hooks. If we found them, I bet they would be V-shaped hooks like the Tlingit Haida use with a bone barb in it for the halibut and the other fish. How they would have sharpened those bone points. The preservation, you can see all the wood and fiber and bone, and even these butter clams had the valves preserved. You know, they had the periosteum valve preserved, and so the preservation is just, it doesn't matter how old it is, actually. And this is Gooks. Gooks is Haida, one of the persons training with us, and low tide of the year, she knew what to get. You know, these big red urchins, right, Justine? And so we had feast, and then she was very impressed that I could slurp these down. And I said, well, I worked for years with a macaw. What do you expect? I know how to eat those. And basketry. Now, we didn't find full-blown baskets. That would have really filled my bucket over. That would have been it. I didn't need anything else. But we did find they were making baskets there. These are all splints. Just like, and we can go 8 weeks at Mud Bay and not find a basket. I mean, it's luck of the straws. You're there 2 weeks and hoping for the best. But they certainly were splitting off these boughs or roots to create. And Gooks is a basket weaver, and she could tell right away these were from basketry waste elements that they were preparing. So they were making baskets. We'll find them someday. Again, that little thread we passed around, that's how small it is. I mean, here's a picture of it. It's a thread like the thing I replicated, right? Did that get around too? Tate took it. And it's made of spruce root, maybe a monocot grass in one of the elements. But again, when I start playing with this, and I've done 50 feet of this now in my decorations, but I can't imagine it being anything but a thread for sewing. And There'll be people that'll say, nah, they use sinew. They didn't use this to make their clothing. We also found this wrapped stick, which could be basketry. But I think it's somebody storing some raw materials back then. Maybe an adze handle. It's certainly battered, crushed in this area, and they certainly had materials for making the adze blade. And these are wood chips by a wedge, but they're chopping off some pretty good wood chips. Muscle, this is ground muscle. Ground muscles are well known for being good adze bits. But these would work just as well. You know, unilaterally, you're flaking it only on that side. You'd have an asymmetrical edge just like you do on a nephrite adze blade. You could easily half that, or put it in a haft like this. We found these wooden hafts that would have held blades they're two parts. So you can see on the end how that blade could go in there for a chisel-like tool. Bears, how are they hunting those? Or how are they getting the bears? And we never really figured that out. But we did find what was a charred shaft that might be beefy enough to take down a bear. It actually had a slot in it. I'm not sure if that's just from the charring. But they didn't have, as before, microblades. You know, we think of early sites on the coast as microblades. Well, this is before microblades, so they're not probably putting blades. They could put muscle shell blades in it. The other thing we found were lots of salmonberry seeds. Kind of gave you a season they might have been there. Some people think those racks are to dry the berries. They could be also from coprolites, from bear poop or bird poop, but there's pretty abundant, and it looks like, or people, but it sure looks, I mean, there's certainly salmonberry. It tells you something about the spring when they were there, probably, hunting bear and taking care of it. So here's Wallaga emptying out the buckets. An amazing archaeologist, he's at UBC right now. He came down to witness this Peace and Friendship award we got, and he was thrilled to meet Dr. Richard Doherty and Charlene Kreis, who also got the award. But he came all the way down from Canada. It wasn't easy for him. He didn't know how far it was to Tacoma. His car broke down, and he didn't know about traffic. But I was really honored that he was able to join us. So beautiful place. We had some amazing moonscapes. We also got to go out and visit Skagway. Ruth and Dick visited there in the 80s or 70s to check it as a UNESCO National Historic. Because we're here, and we weren't sure on that last day how the weather would be, whether he would go out here on the Pacific. And this isn't too far. That earthquake happened right up here and just scared everybody to death. But this is this UNESCO World Heritage Site with the poles as they stand now, and some of the beams that were in this a replicated house from the big houses. But impressed me was, again, one of the caretakers of Haida was making her baskets. You know, this is the ongoing cultural transition going on as we were there. And Bruce probably says it best, Bruce Miller, who is probably a good friend of this museum. I'm not sure how much he was involved, but when you lose the continuity from the beginning of time to present, you lose your true sense of being, and for all purposes are just a faceless being in the crowd, no identity, a faceless, featureless amnesiac, and added that when it comes to extinct cultures, it's the artifacts that tell the story of the lost culture. So very insightful in a Tacoma News Tribune quote from him, obviously a master basket weaver. So thank you, and I made it. I was a little over. I'm surprised you didn't evacuate. But thank you.